He didn't leave a bruise. Just silence. That night stayed behind my eyelids for years. The sound of her hand against my face, sharp, unplanned, the air cutting between us like glass. 5 years passed. No calls. No letters. No Christmas cards tucked into envelopes. And then, at my husband's funeral, she came back. My name is Evelyn Carter, and I am 71 years old. I live on a stretch of land outside Ashwood, Oregon. 1,200 acres of walnut and oak, hills that roll like slow breath and fog that comes down soft as old will every morning. People driving by say it looks peaceful. They don't know that peace can hum like a wound. I was 19 when Daniel and I bought this place. 2 kids with borrowed money and a rusted truck, chasing a dream too big for our hands. We planted the first trees ourselves, dug the trenches for irrigation before sunrise, prayed over every sprout like it could hear us. We didn't take vacations. We took seasons. 40 years of storms and frost and harvests. 40 years of life stitched into soil. And through all of it, our daughter, Claire. When she was small, she used to run barefoot through the fields, shouting for the dogs, laughing at nothing, collecting fallen leaves like treasures. She loved the dirt, the noise of tractors, the smell of rain on bark. Or I thought she did. Maybe I just wanted her to. As she grew older, she started to look at the ranch like it was a cage we built around her. By 17, she stopped helping with the crops. She stopped calling it our place and started calling it your farm. She went off to college in Seattle, said she wanted city light, real opportunity, not the sound of sprinklers and cicadas. Daniel told me to let her go. She'll come back when she's ready, he said. You can't love someone by holding them still. So I waited, through birthdays that passed without calls, through holidays with just 2 plates instead of 3. I kept her room ready, her favorite coffee on the shelf. I reread her last message until the words blurred. Take care of Dad. I'll visit soon. She never did. Daniel carried the silence differently. He spent more time in the workshop, fixing things that didn't need fixing. Some nights I'd hear him talking, not to me, not to anyone, just the empty air. That's what time does when love starts to rot quietly. It fills rooms with things you can't say anymore. And then, one evening in late October, the wind shifted. The kind of wind that makes the trees whisper against the roof. We were sitting in the kitchen, stew simmering, cornbread cooling. Daniel looked tired, but his hands were steady around the mug. Then we heard tires on the gravel. Fast. I knew that sound before I even looked up. Claire's car pulled up, headlights cutting through the fog. The door slammed before the engine stopped. When she stepped into the light of the porch, I barely recognized her, leaner, sharper somehow. A black jacket, dark eyes that didn't soften when they met mine. She didn't hug me. She didn't even take off her boots. She walked straight to the kitchen table and dropped a folder in front of Daniel. I need to talk business, she said. Her voice was calm, professional, like I was just another obstacle in her schedule. Inside the folder, printed appraisals, sale proposals, property estimates. She'd found an investor, she said. Someone from Los Angeles, interested in buying half the ranch to turn it into a wellness retreat. The price was good, she added. We could split it. Daniel didn't answer. He just looked at me. I said no, quietly but firmly. This land isn't for sale. She laughed once, short, bitter. You're clinging to something that's dying, Mom. You and Dad could live comfortably. Don't you think you've earned that? I told her we didn't build this place to cash it out like a stock, that this land was more than property. It was breath, memory, promise. She called me selfish, said we never gave her a choice, that we built our life around dirt and expected her to worship it. Daniel stood up. His chair scraped the floor, and that's when she hit me. It wasn't rage, not really. It was something colder, a reflex, a breaking point. The sound was sharp and clean. Daniel moved between us, his voice low even. You should leave, Claire. She did. The truck roared to life, tires spinning gravel into the air, and then silence again. Daniel didn't speak. He just picked up his mug and stared into it like the answer was floating there. The next morning, he boxed up her things, took down the photos from her room. He never said a word about it again. For years, her name became something we said carefully, like a bruise you don't press on. And then the morning of Daniel's funeral, I saw her again. She stepped out of a black car in polished heels, holding an envelope. No tears, no words, just a quiet face that looked too much like mine at her age. Proud, brittle, and already halfway gone. When she handed me those papers, I thought my knees would give out. A legal claim. She wanted half the ranch, half of everything Daniel and I had built from nothing. But it wasn't shock that froze me. It was recognition that this was who she had become, and maybe who I had helped her become. The service ended before the ground fully thawed. People drifted away in pairs, careful with their words, careful with me. I stood by the cedar box until the last engine faded into the hills. The envelope from Claire was still in my hand, the paper warm from my grip. I opened it at the kitchen table because that's where hard things belong. Under a simple light, beside a chipped saucer with nowhere left to hide. A claim, signatures, deadlines stacked like dominoes. She wanted an even split of the land, equipment, and whatever money the ranch could fetch if broken apart and sold in pieces. I didn't cry. Grief had emptied me clean days earlier, and shock is a cheap visitor once you've buried your person. That night, I walked the length of the porch with a wool blanket over my shoulders and counted the irrigation, heads by sound. The air carried the sweet metal smell of wet bark. Out beyond the orchard, the ridgeline sat steady as a sleeping animal. This place had raised me as much as I had raised it. It knew every version of my name. In the morning, I called Marion Cole. She used to draft deeds for farmers back when the town still had a shoe repair and a school marching band. Now, she works out of a narrow office behind the feed store, a place that always smells faintly of pencil shavings and lemon cleaner. Marion poured tea, set the papers on a green blotter, and read in a silence that made me feel supervised. She filed quickly, she said at last. Efficient counsel, but speed isn't strength. I have Daniel's will, I told her. He updated it 1.5 years ago. He wanted things simple. Marion nodded without encouragement or doubt. Let's see it. Back home, I pulled the fire safe from the hall closet. The key still hung on the same little nail behind the calendar where I used to jot rainfall. The will sat between life insurance forms and a postcard Daniel once sent me from a farm show in Nebraska. Corn printed like confetti. The will was clean, notarized, plain in its language. Everything to me. No bequests to Claire. No hedging. I carried it back to Marion with both hands. She read each page, drew a careful line with a ruler under the signature, and made 3 copies. This helps, she said, and her voice softened, almost tender. It doesn't end the noise, but it lowers the volume. Noise. That was right. Grief has a sound. So does betrayal. Together, they make a kind of low weather inside the body. We spent the afternoon building a file. Property maps, inventory lists, tax statements, an old email from Daniel to our accountant that might as well have been a prayer. Plain words about keeping the ranch whole. Marion asked if I had anything that captured intent in Daniel's voice. I did. Not a recording to a clerk, nothing formal. Just a small video on his old flip phone. Made the winter he was too winded to prune. He's sitting on the tailgate, sun in his eyes and patience in his mouth, telling me to keep the place if he goes first. No poetry, just Daniel. I hadn't watched it since the day he made it. Marion transferred it to a thumb drive and labeled it in block letters like a schoolteacher. After she left, I sat with the weather log I keep by the mudroom door. For years it's been rain totals, frost dates, notes about blossom set. On the page for that October night 5 years ago, I'd written more than numbers. Wind from the west, cornbread cooling, Claire came fast and left faster. I didn't write the slap. I didn't need to. The space around the words held it. I made a copy of that page. Not for court, not as a weapon. For completeness. For the truth of what air can hold. The first notice from the county arrived 2 days later. Plain envelope, bold font. Hearing scheduled. I set it beside the fruit bowl and made myself stand still long enough to feel my pulse slow. Panic wants speed. Steadiness prefers a chair. I handled the ranch the way I handled the fear, task by task. Replaced the cracked gate hinge by the south pasture. Call the co-op about the late delivery of mineral mix. Sharpen the loppers. Return the neighbor's post-hole digger. Eat something with salt in it. Breathe when the kettle sings. In the afternoon, Hector Alvarez stopped by with a bag of bolts I'd ordered. He used to help us stack hay when his college breaks overlapped with harvest. He's a contractor now, broad-shouldered, shadowed eyes. He stood on the porch with his cap in his hands and said, carefully, I heard about the papers. I told him we were working on it. He nodded at the trees, at the long lines of us. Land remembers who stood up for it, he said, and left before I could answer. Marion called that evening. Your daughter's attorney requested an expedited discovery. We'll respond on our timeline. She cleared her throat. Evelyn, I've also seen families soften the ground with mediation. Not to concede, to reduce harm. Claire doesn't want peace, I said. My voice surprised me with how calm it was. She wants proceeds. Marion didn't argue. Then we'll bring light instead of heat. We drafted our reply the next day. It was measured, almost polite. The will, the video, the records. No adjectives trying to do a verb's work. Marion slid the stack into a blue folder and pressed the edge flat with the side of her hand. We hold the line, she said. At dusk, I walked the north fence and found a strand of wire sagging over a stubborn post. I braced my boots, pulled the wire up, tied it down. The sky over Ashwood went salmon, then iron. Somewhere a coyote called and got an answer. I felt something like balance for half a breath. That's when my phone buzzed. A number I didn't know. I let it go to voicemail and listened while leaning against the fence post. Mrs. Carter, this is Lana Park with River and Field Collective. Marion gave me your number. Said you might want to talk about conservation instruments for working lands. No pressure. If you're curious about ways to shield a place from being divided, I'd be glad to stop by. Shield a place from being divided. The phrase slid under my ribs and lodged there like a small, bright nail. I saved the message and kept walking until the porch light found me. The folder from Marion sat on the kitchen table like a quiet witness. I put the kettle on, laid out 2 cups by habit, then put one back. Some changes should be gentle. Others need a clean break. I didn't sleep much. I watched the red dot on the router blink like a steady breath and thought about lines, property, blood, mercy. There's the law. There's love. And there's the land that does not speak but always tells the truth. Before sunrise, I called Lana and asked her to come by the next afternoon. I didn't know what I would say, only what I would not. I would not sell this place to buy peace that would not last. I would not let grief be monetized. I would not let a family argument become the map of the future. When I hung up, the first light hit the barn roof and turned it to pewter. The fog lifted as if someone had taken a gentle breath. Out past the fence, a hawk shifted on the power line and watched the field the way a judge watches a room. Still alert, unpersuaded. I set a clean page in the weather log and wrote the date. Then I wrote 3 words I hadn't used together in years. Hold. The acre. And the house went very quiet, the kind of quiet that means a decision has arrived. By the time Lana Park's truck pulled into the drive, the fog had already burned off and the orchard was humming. Bees in the clover, distant hum of the well pump. I had forgotten what a full morning sounded like. Lana stepped out, holding a thermos and a folder thick with color tabs. She wasn't what I expected. Young, sharp-eyed, with a way of speaking that made you feel she'd already measured your silence before you opened your mouth. I appreciate you seeing me, she said, smiling without hurry. We sat under the walnut tree by the barn, the one Daniel used to lean against when he was fixing valves. I poured her coffee, black and plain. She told me about land trusts, about the way you could sign a place out of inheritance and into permanence. It's not about losing ownership, she explained. It's about giving the land its own name. No one can buy it or divide it. It belongs to its purpose. The phrase stayed with me. Belongs to its purpose. I didn't answer right away. The idea sounded both impossible and deeply right, like a language I had once known but forgotten. What would it take? I finally asked. Patience, she said, and signatures. A few weeks if your paperwork is clean. You'd still live here, still manage everything. But when you're gone, it becomes what you choose, a teaching site, a research ground, a sanctuary. Whatever you wish. I stared at the rows of trees, their trunks lined up like truths that didn't need defending. Lana talked numbers and clauses, but I barely heard her. I was thinking of Claire, how she would react when she learned the land was beyond reach. She'd see it as theft, as one more thing I'd taken. But what she'd never understand was that I wasn't keeping it from her. I was keeping it for itself. When Lana left, she promised to send the documents by the end of the week. That night, I took Daniel's old jacket from the hook by the back door. The pockets still smelled faintly of cedar oil. Inside was a folded note in his handwriting. If you ever doubt what we built, go stand in the east field at dawn. The land will tell you the truth. The next morning I did. The light came slow over the ridge, spreading through the fog in long ribbons. The trees held it like breath. I knew then what I had to do. Marion wasn't surprised when I told her. It's a bold choice, she said. Some would call it final. It is, I replied. That's the point. We spent days working through forms, legal language that twisted like roots, careful definitions of stewardship, clauses about public access. Lana joined us twice, explaining each page in patient tones. Marion checked every line, her pen tapping faintly like a metronome. By the third week, the Carter Homestead Preservation Trust was real. The ranch no longer belonged to me, not entirely. It was under my care, but not my claim. It had a mission now: agricultural education, soil research, community workshops. A legacy that could not be traded for money or sentiment. I signed the final page in Marion's office, the ink soaking slow into the paper. When it was done, she handed me the duplicate copy. Congratulations, she said softly. You've just made yourself untouchable. Outside, the air was clean and sharp. I stood on the porch and let the wind pull at my coat. For the first time in months, I felt something steady under my ribs. Not victory, not peace, just truth. The court date came the next morning. The building smelled like disinfectant and coffee left too long on a burner. I wore Daniel's navy suit jacket. It still fit. Marion walked beside me, calm as stone. Claire was already there. She looked smaller than I remembered. Expensive coat, neat hair, eyes that refused to meet mine. Her lawyer was young, restless, dressed for battle. When the hearing began, he spoke first, stories about neglect, emotional distance, unfulfilled promises, words crafted to sound like wounds. He painted her as the daughter of a stubborn mother who clung to dirt instead of family. I sat still, hands folded, and let him speak. When it was Marion's turn, she didn't argue. She simply handed the judge the documents, the notarized will, Daniel's video, the certification of the trust. Her voice stayed level, the kind that made silence feel respectful. The land, she said, is now a protected educational trust. It can no longer be sold or divided. Mrs. Carter's late husband granted her full authority. This claim no longer applies to any private inheritance. The judge nodded, shuffled papers, asked a few questions, then dismissed us until the ruling. Claire turned toward me then, eyes wide but unreadable. Her mouth opened, then closed. For a second I saw the little girl she used to be, the one who'd once fallen asleep on Daniel's shoulder in church, clutching a walnut in her small palm as if it were treasure. And then she looked away. Outside the courthouse, the air smelled faintly of rain. Marion shook my hand and told me to go home, to rest. I walked to the truck alone. My reflection in the window looked older than I'd ever admitted. That evening, I lit the porch lamp and brewed tea. I didn't think about the trial or what came next. I thought about the orchard, the way it rooted itself again each spring without permission. For the first time, I understood that survival wasn't about winning. It was about staying. The following week, Marion called. "The judge upheld the trust," she said. "Case closed." I thanked her, then stood by the window a long while. The fog rolled low, heavy and familiar. Somewhere in that quiet, I felt Daniel's presence, not as memory but as rhythm. That night, for the first time since he died, I slept with the window open. The house breathed. The land did too. And the silence that came wasn't empty. It was earned. 2 weeks after the ruling, the mornings turned brittle. Frost clung to the grass before sunrise, and every sound, boots on gravel, the slam of a gate, felt sharper, closer. The ranch had settled into its quiet rhythm again. No more letters. No phone calls. The world seemed to have gone still. Then one evening, just before the light disappeared behind the orchard, there was a knock at the door. I didn't move at first. I was shelling walnuts into a bowl, the radio murmuring some old country song that Daniel used to hum when he was tired. When the second knock came, softer this time, I knew. Claire. She stood on the porch in that same black coat, her breath visible in the chill. Her face was pale, her eyes ringed with the kind of tired you can't hide with makeup. She didn't say hello. "Can I come in?" I stepped aside. The smell of baked cornbread hung in the air, habit I couldn't break. Claire sat at the kitchen table, same chair Daniel used to take. Her hands stayed folded in her lap. "I'm dropping the appeal," she said quietly. "My lawyer said there's no point. You've locked it all down. Congratulations." Her voice carried no sarcasm, no fight, just exhaustion. I didn't answer. The kettle whistled. I turned it off, poured 2 cups of tea, though she didn't touch hers. She kept her gaze fixed on the table. "I thought you'd cave after Dad died. I thought you'd sell, or at least negotiate. I didn't think you'd—" She stopped, shaking her head. "You really went through with it." "I did," I said. Silence filled the kitchen, thick as dust. She leaned back, eyes glinting with something like disbelief. "I took out a loan. Thought I'd win. Now I've got debt I can't pay and nothing to show for it." Her words landed flat, without accusation. Just fact. "I'm sorry," I said. She gave a small, humorless laugh. "You always are." For a moment, neither of us moved. The air felt crowded with ghosts. Then she exhaled, rubbed her forehead. "I don't know why I came. Maybe guilt. Maybe curiosity. Maybe because I didn't have anywhere else to go tonight. I wanted to ask where she'd been living, who she'd become out there beyond the ridge and the silence. But I didn't. Some questions aren't bridges. They're traps." Finally, she said, "Do you still have tools in the barn?" I nodded. "Let me help with something. Just for tonight." So I gave her a task. Simple. Safe. The row of dull shovels by the wall needed sharpening before the next frost. She followed me outside without a word. The cold bit at our cheeks. The barn smelled like sawdust and oil. She rolled up her sleeves and worked the file across the metal, slow and careful, the sound like a whisper cutting through old air. I stood by the doorway, watching her shoulders move in the light. For a second, I saw the child she used to be, barefoot in the field, smudged with dirt, her laughter bright as sunlight. Then the image faded, and there was only this, 2 women, bound by something too heavy for words, each trying to fix what couldn't be undone. When she finished, she wiped her hands on her jeans and didn't meet my eyes. "I'll be back tomorrow," she said. She didn't ask. She stated it. I nodded. "All right." She left without saying good night. I watched her walk across the yard until the dark took her shape. Inside, I placed her untouched cup of tea in the sink, still half full and cooling fast. That night, I didn't sleep. Every small sound made me flinch. The creak of the rafters, the wind pushing at the window pane. But beneath the restlessness was something else, something quieter. Not hope, not yet, but the outline of it. The next morning she returned. No announcement, no explanation. Just parked her car near the shed, grabbed a pair of gloves from the rack, and started clearing the debris by the south fence. By the third day, she was checking the compost bins, sweeping the barn, fixing the latch that had stuck since last spring. She never came inside, never stayed long enough for lunch. But she came. The volunteers from the educational program noticed. They whispered in the afternoons, asking who the woman was. I didn't tell them. I didn't say her name. It was enough that she was there. One afternoon I saw her helping Nora, a college student who'd joined the trust to learn about soil cycles. Claire was showing her how to prune the younger trees, how to check for fungus at the branch base. Her tone was patient, almost tender. I stood at the edge of the field and watched them. When she caught sight of me, she didn't wave. She just gave a small nod and went back to work. Later that evening, after the others left, she asked quietly, "Do you have Dad's old books somewhere?" "The farming ones." I pointed to a shelf in the office. She found what she was looking for, a cracked copy of The Land Speaks in Seasons. She turned the pages like something sacred. The next morning a package arrived at the post office addressed to me. Inside was a rare edition of that same book, restored and reprinted with a small note in her handwriting. I remembered. I didn't call her. I didn't thank her. But when she came by that afternoon, I left the book open on the table where she'd see it. She didn't say a word, just smiled once barely and went back outside. Something had shifted. The air between us wasn't warm, but it wasn't cold anymore either. It was something in between, a truce without language. That night, as I sat by the window, the orchard spread out beneath the moonlight like a living map. I realized forgiveness doesn't always arrive with confession. Sometimes it just grows quietly, like roots finding their way back to the same ground. By late December, the ranch had found a rhythm again. Different, slower, but steady. The mornings began with frost on the porch rails and ended with the soft clatter of tools being put away before dark. Claire was part of that rhythm now. She came most mornings, never saying if she would. Some days she worked quietly beside the volunteers. Others she disappeared into the barn to sort equipment or fix what had been broken long before she returned. She didn't overstep, didn't ask for praise. She just worked. People started to talk in town, of course. Ashwood is small. Stories echo there like wine through empty pipes. Some said she'd come back to make peace. Others said she was only waiting for me to die so she could reclaim what she'd lost. I stopped listening. The land didn't care for gossip. It only understood presence. The Carter Homestead Trust was beginning to take shape beyond my own reach. Lana brought a team of students from the Agricultural College in Salem to help with winter mapping and soil studies. They were young and curious, full of questions about irrigation systems and root health. They saw the place as potential, not history. That was good. It meant the ranch had a future separate from me. One afternoon, I watched from the porch as Claire walked through the north field with Nora, the young volunteer who'd taken to her. They were pruning the saplings, their laughter faint between the rows. Claire's posture was different now, less guarded, her hands moving with an ease that surprised me. When they passed near the shed, I heard her explaining something Daniel used to say about tree growth. You don't force the branch where you want it. You guide it until it learns to hold its own weight. Her voice cracked just a little on his name. That evening, when the workers left, she stayed behind. We shared dinner without talking much. The heater clicked, the dog shifted near the door, the world small and kind in its quiet way. Afterward, she took out her phone and showed me photos of an apartment she'd rented months ago in Eugene. The lease had ended, The boxes were still there, but she didn't know if she'd go back. "I thought this place would feel smaller," she said softly. "But it doesn't." I didn't answer. She looked at me, hesitated, then asked, "Do you ever regret it?" "The trust." I shook my head. "Not once." She stared down at her hands. "I used to think you were selfish," she said, "but I think I understand now. You were just trying to protect something I didn't know how to love yet." It was an apology, not really, but it was close enough to reach me. The next morning, she was out before sunrise, checking the irrigation valves. I watched from the kitchen window, coffee warming my palms. For the first time in years, the sight didn't ache. Weeks passed like that. Winter settled in deep. The soil froze, the trees slept, and life slowed to the sound of wind and the rhythm of boots across gravel. In February, Lana returned with a photographer and a small team from the state's Rural Preservation Program. They wanted to document the trust as a model project. "An example of generational resilience," she said. I almost refused. The idea of cameras here felt like intrusion. But Claire convinced me. "Let them see it," she said. "Let them see what you built." The crew arrived on a gray morning. They filmed the barns, the orchard rows, the workshop where we hosted soil testing classes. They asked to film me, but I stayed behind the scenes. This story wasn't about faces. It was about hands and earth. When the photos came back, one stopped me cold. It was taken during harvest, tables lined with seedlings, volunteers sorting soil samples, the barn doors open to sunlight. In the corner of the frame, barely visible, stood Claire, carrying a crate of tools, her head turned toward the light. That single image held more truth than words ever could. That night, I wrote a short piece for the Trust's newsletter. Nothing poetic, just honest. About the land, about rebuilding what breaks, about choosing care over ownership. Lana edited it and sent it to the Rural Board. 2 weeks later, they accepted it for publication in their spring report. When I gave Claire a copy, she read it slowly. Her fingers stayed on the page long after her eyes had finished. Then she set it down, her voice barely above a whisper. "It sounds like forgiveness." "It's not," I said. "It's clarity." She nodded. "Maybe that's the same thing." That evening, she stayed for dinner again. We ate in comfortable silence. She reached for seconds. I poured her more tea. The heater hummed. The old radio played Daniel's favorite station. For once, nothing needed to be fixed. Nothing needed to be said. When she left that night, she paused at the door. "I'll see you tomorrow," she said. And I believed her. By early spring, the ground began to loosen under the sun. The last of the frost melted into the soil, leaving it dark and rich again. The walnut trees woke slow, their branches tracing new green against the sky like cautious hope. The ranch was alive in a way it hadn't been for years. Not loud, not busy, alive in rhythm, in breath, in steadiness. The volunteers came early now, the younger ones first, hauling bags of compost and tools. Lana stopped by twice a week, her clipboard always in hand, her smile easy. The local college had started sending more students for the seasonal program, and soon we had people from all over Oregon walking our fields, learning how to listen to the land instead of control it. Claire never missed a morning. She'd arrive before the others, often with a thermos of coffee and a notebook tucked under her arm. Sometimes she worked beside the students, teaching them what she knew. Other days she fixed the things no one else noticed. Loose hinges, leaking hoses, cracked handles. Small tasks that kept everything whole. We didn't talk about the past. It hung between us like mist, visible but not choking anymore. One afternoon, I found her standing near the south orchard, watching a group of students gather soil samples. She didn't see me at first. Her posture was relaxed, hands in her jacket pockets, a small smile on her face. I realized then that she looked at this place differently now, not as inheritance or loss, but as belonging. That was enough. Later that week, Lana brought news. The Carter Homestead Trust had been nominated for a state award in rural preservation. They'll want photos, a statement, she said. I laughed softly. Tell them to photograph the trees. They do all the work. Still, it was strange seeing our name printed like that. Something permanent after so much unraveling. Daniel would have teased me for it. Said the land had finally become louder than the people tending it. The day of the ceremony, I stayed home. Claire went in my place, wearing my mother's old brooch, a gold oak leaf, small but steady. When she returned that evening, she placed the plaque on the kitchen table. They called it a story of endurance, she said with a faint smile. I told them it's just good soil. We both laughed quietly. In the following weeks, the fields turned soft with green. I began planting new seedlings in the southern plot, the way Daniel taught me. Firm hands, gentle pressure, patience. Claire joined me sometimes, kneeling beside me in the dirt. We didn't fill the silence with words. We let it be. One morning in May, I woke to the sound of music drifting from the barn, an old tune, one Daniel loved. I followed the sound and found Claire cleaning tools, humming softly. The sunlight fell through the open door, catching dust motes like floating seeds. For a long moment, I just stood there watching. This was what peace looked like, not perfect, not forgiven, but quietly mended. That evening, we sat on the porch while the sky turned pink over the hills. The students had gone, the dogs asleep at our feet. I poured us each a cup of tea. Claire looked out at the orchard, the rows of trees stretching toward the horizon. I used to think this place owned you, she said. Now I see you were just taking care of it. I smiled. It takes care of us too. You'll see. She didn't argue. She didn't look away. For once, the silence between us didn't feel like a gap. It felt like shared breath. When she left that night, I stood by the window and watched her car disappear down the long road until the headlights vanished behind the hill. The fields glowed under the moon, each tree holding its own kind of light. I thought of Daniel then, not as absence, but as the echo still living in the roots, the soil, the air. Maybe that's what legacy really is. Not what you leave behind, but what keeps growing after you stop tending it. The next morning, the volunteers arrived early for planting. Claire was already out there, sleeves rolled up, dirt on her cheek, laughing with them. Her laughter carried across the field, low and real. And in that moment, watching her, I understood something simple and final. I hadn't been waiting for her to come home. I'd been waiting for her to belong again, to the land, to herself, to something larger than either of us. Now she did, and that was enough.